Hello, everybody. This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJobProjects.com, and today this is the Early Bird Artcast episode 11. And today I have a special guest here. If you happen to be one of the people who has watched or listened, I should say, to the Art and Story podcast back in the day, you may have remembered this guest, Mr. Kim Holm. How you doing, Kim?
Excellent. I'm doing good. And how are you?
I'm doing great. Just woke up and saw you again. We talked before, but I saw your live stream on Instagram, and I was like, "Oh man, Kim, he's such an awesome dude. I gotta do a chat and see if he's around to do a video." Um,
Actually, I had just come into my studio and was kind of at a loss for what should I do? What should I do? Why not try the Instagram live option for the first time? And apparently it attracts Americans, so that's good.
Actually, it probably wouldn't attract too many Americans at this time of
Ah.
day. I think it's no, I mean normally it would, but this time of day for us is I'm the only one who's crazy enough to get up and do art at 8 a.m. I'm usually actually up at 6 a.m. but doing it, but it's the weekend, so but
Yeah.
for you it's like what 1 o'clock or something?
Oh, it's more. I think it's 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
I'm filming from my phone, and that's the only clock I have at the studio as well. So I have. It could be midnight for all I know. I'm lost without my phone. So yeah.
Yeah, I know how that goes. For sure. So, it's been a long time since I've heard you on the podcast. I wonder, what have you been up to? I see you've been pretty busy with Inktober, and I'm curious, have you been working on any comics or anything lately?
Well, there happened. Um, I am now officially a ex comic book artist.
Really?
Yeah, that's the hardest thing I've had to admit in my life ever, I think, was that this last winter I had to realize that I was making almost all my money on illustration,
Hmm.
and I spent all my days being sick with guilt over never having time for my comic projects.
Mm.
And even when I was working on them, with the time between the illustrations and having a family and kids and stuff, and the types of projects I liked to do, uh, I was never getting this sense of progress on any of my work. So I had to admit defeat
Mm.
and uh, and fall down from being a cartoonist to now being just a lousy artist. So I'm about to celebrate my first year as an artist, and
Wow.
nothing's really changed except the guilt part, um, and that's a huge part.
Well,
I
that's
think.
good. I'm glad you've been able to. I'm
So
glad you've been able to alleviate the guilt. That's no good.
so before that, I each year I did fewer and fewer comic book projects. Uh, Once in a while, Mark Rudolph of Art and Story book fame, um, Art and Story podcast fame, invited me to be a part of his awesome metal anthology about Merciful Fate and Celtic Frost and Judas Priest. But apart from that, it was fewer and fewer comic book projects.
Right.
Um, then more and more art and illustration and selling originals. So that's what
Right.
I'm going. Today I'm
And
going to try to draw an original of some sort.
Awesome. And how has that been going?
Uh, it's it's hard, but it's been going very good. I don't know if you noticed, but a few soon 10 years ago, I started drawing during metal concerts.
Hmm.
So I'm headbanging and drawing and uh, trying to capture what happens on the stage, and
Right.
that sort of opened up a new audience for me who wants my dirtiest side, my sloppiest, my fastest, and also my truest side. So I've been really the last few years been figuring out more and more of my own artistic voice and just doubling down on that and skipping a lot of the I used to love and I still love experimenting with different types of styles and such, but uh, now it's allowed me to draw more and more just as me and figuring out what that is, especially during the last year where I've sort of gone a bit wilder in figuring out what I want to do when I'm not telling a story.
Right.
Actually,
Um,
yeah.
so, um, how, there's a couple things I want to ask. Do you, first of all, I'm curious, do you do illustration as a career, or is this, kind of just some freelance things here and there? Or?
It is a very, very poor career, but it works
Hmm.
um, somehow.
Somehow, some way.
The creditors would differ at times, but it works.
Right. And then also, yeah, you mentioned kind of your like sloppier style or whatever. And that's one thing I always enjoyed about your work is that it always was just very loose, gritty. Just there's a lot of people who do that kind of style, and I've always enjoyed it. And I play around with that myself as well. It's not easy to do, actually. Like, it's easy to be sloppy, but it's not easy to be sloppy and like make it actually look good too at the same time.
Yeah.
I think you pull it off pretty good.
Thank you. It's not as easy as it looks. But yeah, I've always been attracted uh, to art that feels alive and
Mhm.
um, also art where you can see the flaws. Um, and I think that's something I've been getting gradually better at is even though I like art where I can see the artist's flaws, I hate the flaws in my own art.
Mm,
And reminding yourself that you are not the best person to interpret this and letting there be room for the kinds of flaws you do and also figuring out which of them you should actually stop doing because not all flaws are created equal. um, so and it's really hard to look at your own drawing and see all the things where you tried something and it didn't come out 100% as you wanted it and admit that hey maybe it maybe it came out better. um, and it's certainly not something I would even entertain uh, like 10, 15 years ago
Mm,
in the same way, I think,
right.
because you know, as you get more sure of your skills, this also becomes more possible to do.
Mm,
If you're unskilled and drawing sloppy, then perhaps you should focus on your skills as well as keeping your work alive. But um, if you sort of know what you're doing, then perhaps you should stop worrying about doing it right and start worrying about making it feel alive.
yeah, that old adage of learning the rules before you break them, kind of thing.
Yeah. And with that being said, I know a lot of great artists who just break the rules,
Yeah,
never did learn them, just break them, and uh, but then you have to come up with your own rules. And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, can there really truly be rules to art? I mean, it depends on what you're going for. If you're going for, trying to be, kind of show a realistic kind of thing or a very representational thing, then yeah, you're going to have to learn some rules probably. But, when you're just expressing yourself, maybe there's not so many rules.
I'm
Um,
going to have to fight you on that one.
Fight me?
uh,
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I think uh, uh, I think that no matter what, art is a bunch of rules,
Hmm.
and but they are rules on so many levels that but you can't avoid them. You can't be devoid of rules because then what comes out isn't art.
Hmm.
Art is putting things in order, and that order is based on rules. But they might be, simple rules like how the texture of the paper works together with the ink you're using, or they might be anatomical rules, or they might be the rules of storytelling, of emotion. They might be the rules of human psychology, how to affect someone. But if you're saying no, no, my art doesn't follow any rules, uh, all I'm hearing is that you don't know your art.
Mm.
I think.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. It's really hard to say, but like I get what you mean because there's definitely you can see it. Like it's hard to really define sometimes, but you can see it when somebody has they're kind of breaking the rules or they're just taking a lot of liberties and but you could tell they have some kind of sense of design in there, and then there's the ones that don't really just don't and you're like they probably would do well with learning something aesthetically about art for sure.
Yeah. Um, and I think one of the things I'm most uh, worried about uh, is actually looking as if I know the rules too well. Because I'm really fascinated with people who draw in a rough, um, loose style, such as I do,
Hmm.
uh, but they got a very controlled and academic look to it. And that's not what I that's not what I'm going after. Um, I want something like what you find in Jack Kirby's art. So
Hmm.
he knew the rules pretty well as most comic book artists, but he was too excited about uh, telling the story,
Hmm.
so he didn't care if he broke the rules. And some of his art is really sloppy and it's really ugly and it's fucking sorry if I can't
That's
swear.
all right. No problem.
Um, it's marvelous. It's so energetic, and there is this honesty and energy that you find with people who don't calculate how to break the rules, and that's
Mm.
always something I'm uh, going after. But the problem with going after it is that you can't really go after it intellectually because then you become calculated. So you have to figure out ways of uh, doing it without
Right.
thinking about it. I think
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense though. I mean, I agree because I've like you I've done a lot of experimenting with finding the balance between building my skills and coming, trying to put forth that energy and it is really difficult. One thing I've been studying a lot of listening to a lot of punk rock music and just really getting inspired by kind of their DIY ethic and how they just like it's like it kind of it came about at a time where rock and roll was getting a little bit too sophisticated for itself, and you know it wasn't really approachable for the common person. It was the rock and roll was really good, but it was like these people who kind of came at it originally to just rock out ended up kind of becoming very good musicians and I think that kind of happens a lot. I actually there's this guy who makes like I don't know how to describe him. He makes like designer toys, but they're like really like almost like Andy Warhol or some kind of modern art where he'll literally take another toy and he'll like modify it and then he'll put like the backing card with the I forget the little bubble thing on it and he'll just it ends up becoming a piece of art basically, but he goes by the name Sucklord and he and I remember hearing him say one time, it's actually become difficult because I'm starting to get a little too good at this now. you know
Yeah,
so it's looking better and it's like he has you kind of have to find a way to just like jump in, the rules but kind of jump in wildly and I don't know. It's a tough balance.
yeah, definitely. But the punk DIY attitude is definitely something that helps bringing it. It helps keep you grounded if you approach your work in that way. Uh, uh, and I'm not a huge White Stripes fan, not because I dislike them, just because I haven't listened to them. But I think it's funny that apparently Jack White uh, kept Meg White from learning how to drum better,
Hmm.
which is great for their music, but hopeless for her as a musician. It's not tenable uh, to do that in the long run.
Right.
because I think I think I don't know who said this, but someone said that if you don't progress as an artist, you go back.
Mm.
There's no standing still. You either get better or you get worse.
Huh.
Um, and and I do believe you can get better in worse ways, but at least it's getting better.
Yeah.
Um, so you have to sort of mix your punk approach with some true way of progressing, because a punk band that's playing the same sloppy four three chords and they're now 50, 60, that's not that charming anymore. It's not real anymore, I think.
Yeah. It's like when a kid does something super funny and everybody's laughing, and then he goes on and repeats it like 100 more times. It
Yeah,
becomes less and less funny.
yeah. Very quickly. My eldest does that basically all day long.
Nice. So, speaking about all this, so you're talking about like you this whole kind of series of where you go to metal concerts and you do art. So you do that like actually in the crowd and everything.
Yeah, I usually get a spot in the photo pit or by the side of the page, the side of the stage,
Hmm.
leaning the artwork on the stage. Sometimes having to move it very quickly so I don't kill the guitarist going out in the front of the stage to do his solo. So yeah, I do it completely at the spot, in rhythm with the music, in the bad lighting, sometimes in the crowd when people are shoving me and spilling beer on me, and it's intense.
And is this part of like the performance? Like you're friends with the band or the promoter or something, or is this just you going in and trying to do it?
It's always in agreement with the promoter or the band or both, and the bands usually are really fond of the results, and sometimes they invite me, sometimes I get invited by promoters. A lot of the time, I take contact with the band or the promoters. So yeah,
Hmm.
but it's not. I always try to do it in a non-invasive way, uh, because I don't want to be some dude with his sketch pad blocking the sight of someone who has paid for the concert.
Hmm.
And the head banging while drawing comes in mostly because it's a good way of shutting down your mental functions and just drawing, but
Hmm.
also as a way of showing that I'm there to appreciate the concert, that I'm part of the crowd in some sense.
Right.
Because I get a bit sick of photographers who don't respect the audience. That sort of ruins shows for a lot of people. So I try not to be. I can be all kinds of douchebags, but I try not to be that kind. douchebag.
You're very picky choosy about your douchebaggery.
Oh yes.
Well, that's good to hear. Um, wow. So, I guess I'm. So, is that was that like? How did that first come about? Was that like in an effort to like try to figure out how to do stuff more like we were talking about? Like you get to a certain amount of skill, and it's like sometimes you need some kind of things to help provoke you to get a little bit more in that headspace of just you know
Yeah, it was
kind of
not.
going wild at it.
It wasn't that calculated. It was very simply that I had bought tickets for the Hole in the Sky festival here in Bergen because I wanted to see bands such as Urfaust and Rotting Christ,
Hmm.
and and I was broke, and I tried to sell my tickets, and nobody bought them. So I thought, hey, if I bring my sketchbook, I can uh, sit and sketch something while enjoying the concert. So then I at least won't be wasting the time. And at that time, I didn't even think I was going to draw the bands,
Hmm.
but I gave it a shot and thought, hey, this actually this actually works somehow. And then by the second night, I was running back and forth from where I was sitting and into the pit to headbang, and and I saw that this actually this is something. There is an affinity between my style and the music, and I can't stop doing it. And then from that point, people started noticing it, and I started contacting bands, and it just grew out of being broke.
A lot of things do.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's interesting how that all worked out. Um, I'm curious, since you said you stopped making comics to go into a whole different direction here. Do you still have your comics available somewhere to either read or purchase?
Yeah, most of my stuff is available in some form. My graphic novel adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's Pickman's Model is available for free online. You just if you search for Kim Holm Pickman's Model, then you can find it a download link on archive.org, and um, it's also available on Indie Planet, but I don't think anyone has bought it from there in a long while. And my other stuff is available here and there, but I'm not making any effort to delete my stuff in any shape or form.
Right. So you kind of touched on a couple other passions of yours that I think are really interesting, and that is one H.P. Lovecraft, and then also this whole kind of the copyright situation with the
Yes.
Creative Commons, and I don't know, I don't know the terminology. I haven't thought about it actually for a while, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love
I
to hear some of your thoughts on either of those or both of them.
okay. What do you want to start with? Because I can go on all day about
You
both of
still
them.
there?
I'm still here. Hello?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I think you popped out for a second, but I hear you now.
I can talk all day about all of them, but or both of them. But what do you want to?
I guess we'll start with the Lovecraft stuff since we were talking about that particular book.
Yeah, it, I just uh, I did a very faithful adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft tale called Pickman's Model, and I did it so faithfully because I sort of saw that there is something that's being ignored in Lovecraft's texts that I really enjoy, and that is really uh, easy to transfer to comic books if you just give it enough space. Because people say Lovecraft is impossible to adapt because of his tentacled monsters and undescribable, unnamable beasts. But actually, I think Lovecraft is uh, quite good for adapting to comic book format because he's an author that never really describes what happens in the world. He always describes either rather plain physical things or very poetically, or most of the time just what his characters are thinking. So you can more or less take 80% of his text and just treat it as thought bubbles.
Hmm.
And I hadn't seen anyone do that, and still haven't seen anyone do except for me. So there's still potential there. And also, I think Lovecraft is more and more an important um, author because of how he struggled with, I should say, the modern world, and he's what there's a lot of criticism lately of Lovecraft being an awful racist, and that's awfully true. But there's not many awful racists that again and again write tales about how humanity, including his own race, is worth nothing, and how his characters, again and again, based on himself, turns out to be perhaps not based on himself, but turned out to be uh, a monster.
Hmm.
And there's all these really difficult themes that that he works with, and he's trying to find expressions for his own peers and uh, his own weaknesses, and I think it's important to take that seriously. And I think that if you say no, you shouldn't take it seriously because he's a racist, then no, that's one of the weaknesses he's struggling with in his work, and
Hmm.
it makes some of his work hard to read. Uh, but I do think that I'm on pretty firm ground when I say that his fears and his weaknesses and his doubts are things that appeal to uh, uh, a wide range of humanity. Uh, and, and that's the reason why people like, for instance, did you know the band Living Color?
Yeah, I'm not familiar 100% with their music, but I've definitely heard their music. It's been a while.
Yeah, one of the prime influences on the songwriting, the lyric writing for Vernon Reid, the guitarist in Living Color, is H.P. Lovecraft,
Hmm.
and that's why it's called Living Color with an O and a U because in color, because that's the color out of space.
Mm.
A Lovecraft story is the living color, and I don't think Vernon Reid has written a single Cthulhu Mythos lyric ever, because that's not what he does.
Mm.
But he still tries to capture that sense of alienation that you find in Lovecraft stories, and that cosmic alienation. Yeah. So yeah, that's uh,
Yeah.
that's your
Um,
Lovecraft for you.
yeah, no, it is. It's very interesting, and it's funny because I recently I've been having a conversation with a friend of mine. Actually, he's in the chat right now, Fway Storm, and I actually mentioned Lovecraft the other day because he um, we were talking about separating the art from the artist,
Yeah,
um, and I think it's really difficult to sometimes. But actually, one exception for me is H.P. Lovecraft, because for some reason, to me, this is the point I was thinking when I thought of it was, you know, his work is like so dark and twisty and goes into depths of, the human condition and the dark parts, um, at such a different level than you would normally get from most authors or artists and stuff. And the fact that he had, you know, these obvious uh, weaknesses, as you said, I think that kind of shows, I don't know, like there's something about the fact that his ideology was in such a way that, you know you kind of go to a dark soul to get these kind of dark um
yeah,
uh kind of depictions.
yeah. Um, art that illuminates the dark parts of humanity should not come from a happy place,
Mm.
because then it's dishonest. And an example I've used before when talking about art versus the artist is the most recent awful example is Bill Cosby.
Yeah, that's exactly who I think
Yeah,
of
because
too.
uh, what he did actually makes his art worse because it makes it dishonest.
Yep.
He portrayed himself as the epitome of moral, and he was a rapist pig.
Hmm.
Those two do not go together. What Lovecraft writes and how he lived went together very well. So if you are surprised uh, about his weaknesses, you haven't read his stories well. It's
Right.
all there.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I don't necessarily think that Lovecraft's bust should be used for the fantasy award, but uh, I have no very strong opinions about that. But I don't think it's an argument against his art. His art is important because it does come from an honest place, and
Right.
that honest place is filled with unmentionable, unnabable horrors.
Mm.
So it's not your happy place.
Right.
And that being said, he was a person with apparently a lot of humor, and he seemed happy to a lot of people, and he liked silly jokes, and he liked marching band music, and there's all these other aspects to Lovecraft, but none of them makes his art dishonest.
Right.
Um, I think.
That's interesting. That's really an interesting distinction. Authenticity is a big deal. Honesty is a big deal, and yeah, that makes sense. I never kind of I always wondered why, I have a hard time watching, the Cosby Show or listening to some of his old stuff, and compared to something like Lovecraft. I mean, I just can't anymore. It just is weird, but like Lovecraft on the other hand is, yeah, it makes sense that the honesty is kind of the key there. um
And, and you like your hip hop, so in
mhm,
hip hop, honesty is a complicated but important topic. Uh,
that's true.
uh, it's a problem when everyone is rapping about being gangsta,
Yeah.
but it, the worst problem with it is not those who were actually describing their lives, but those who pretended. Uh, and I'm not saying that original gangster rappers were amazing people or that they were awful, but they described a reality, and that's one of the functions of art, is to give voice to people's reality, even when it's uh, even when it's awful. And right now, I'm drawing. I'm guessing it's a siren who has used her siren's call to call in a ship, and you have some drowning people, and you will get a lot of sea foam and splatter and everything around. But I was listening to a podcast about the history of ancient Greece, and even back then, you started having trouble with artists, poets who were mercenaries and poets at the same time, who were describing their life in too much honesty and getting
Interesting.
censored. so
Wow.
so uh, and the ideals of epic Greek poetry are not the ideals we should subscribe to today,
Right.
but uh, they are not useless as art. They're pretty damn good as art.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. um I just wanted to mention as well, my friend Foy Storm, he's, like I said in the chat, he actually had a couple questions.
Yeah.
um he was wondering, what is your favorite band to draw while you played live, and which band would you most like to draw as they play live?
Uh, which band I would most like to draw is Nile, the American technical death metal band, who are so deep into Egyptology that they have footnotes in their lyrics and references to which archaeology is, and which Egyptologists claim that this happened and this happened. Fantastic band, very fun live. I have never gotten to draw them, so I would love to do that. The most fun, um, there are a lot of really fun bands to draw. Um, I was talking about the second night at Hole in the Sky, where I figured out that this was something I had to do, and there I was drawing uh, Suffocation, another technical death metal band from the States, and I've drawn them once after that, and they're the band who made me commit to drawing concerts, and those are two of the most fun concert going experiences I've ever had. Then a last one is the very first band I drew live. They are called Urfaust. They're from the Netherlands, and I was at the festival to see them, so it was a great pleasure the first time. But then I've gotten to draw them two or three times after that, and each time I just learned something new about drawing, and they're still one of my favorite bands and great people. So that's yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. And yeah, if anybody else would like to ask a question for Kim or for us, feel free. I'll definitely ask it. So, uh, yeah, I guess let's jump into the whole copyright thing. You have very strong opinions and thoughts on that, and
Yeah,
I'd love to hear some stuff about that.
yeah. Basically, I root for the pirates. That's my basis. That's not really my basis, but it is the easy way of describing it. I became interested in copyright during the 90s when Image Comics came about and creators' rights were the most important thing. And I believe it is a lot better for creators to have to own the creator's rights. So I strongly support that. But I also started thinking about what is copyright actually. And um, it turns out that copyright is a form of censorship where you let the state protect your exclusive rights in order to achieve certain goals, like creating more art, creating better art, and supporting artists. The problem with this is that I find it very hard to see how copyright, as it stands today, does any of the things it's supposed to do. It seems that it's ripe with exploitation of artists from big companies. It is used to shut down uh, artistic projects all the time, like fan projects. It more or less killed folk art, folk tales, and folk music. Folk art has gotten through it in some way because it's the least affected by copyright. But folk music basically died as a result of copyright coming into being. And it's impossible to make folk music a living thing now. Now, I'm not talking about Bob Dylan folk music. I'm talking about um, the what's often referred to as traditional, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I also believe that copyright, as it stands today, is awful at doing what it's mostly supposed to do, which is get people to pay for art. And I think that because we have these copyright laws, which is based on exclusive use, so you can sell your exclusive use to a company, and they sell it for you, and they make their money stopping other people from using your art. Because we have this rigid system, we have no way of um, monitoring and monetizing all the gray areas, like uh, strictly speaking, if you're selling your little clay Zelda figurines on on Etsy, you are breaking copyright.
Hmm.
But I don't think you're a bad person for doing it. If you get if you do fan art of superheroes and get people to not even buy the art, but get enough people to your YouTube channel when you draw, so that you um, get advertising income, then you're breaching copyright. But I don't think it makes you a bad person that you're drawing Batman.
Hmm.
And we need a system that is open enough so that people are free to create art, to find ways of making money on their art and surviving on their art without infringing on the original creator's rights. So we need to make a new copyright system or a new intellectual property system which has very strict rules on exclusive use. Exclusivity should be very limited, and that has good rules for sharing and for reusing and mixing and remixing and sampling and all those kinds of artistic um, things that those great artistic things that require working on a previously created artwork. Like, sampling it is sampling did not kill music as they said it would in the 1980s.
Hmm. Yeah, that's it's really interesting. So I don't know, like I think you're right. Like in some ways, having it open really kind of opens up the doors to creativity, and maybe gives creators more freedom. It's interesting that you said that maybe creating some kind of new system, and I'm not sure what that new system would be. Um, but I also one thing too though with the copyright laws, and this is forgive my ignorance. I'm putting the question out there, or the thing out there, and you can kind of tell me where I'm wrong. Um, but there's this whole thing where like having like whoever owns the copyright, hopefully it's the creator, but that's kind of one way you can actually make a good living is, a lot of people don't really understand this, but when you create, say, a comic book or whatever it is, say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a great example. When you create something like that, you you as a creator, you can now take that thing and you can slice it up in as many little slices, pieces of pie as you possibly can, and you can serve that and make money off of each one of those slices, sometimes in a royalty basis, sometimes in just one fee, and you can make a lot of money, as for example Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has done. And to me, that's part of how copyright works. Isn't that a good thing, or what do you
Well,
think?
um, you have there are a lot of different aspects to it. Is the current copyright laws better than no intellectual property laws at all.
Hmm.
Uh, Arguably, they are better. Uh, I would have a hard time figuring out an argument for not having any laws at all.
Hmm.
So that's not what I'm advocating. But there are some really important aspects in the creator owning the rights themselves and and then deciding they are going to use how they're going to divide it up. Like for instance, if you have Peanuts by Charles Schulz on one side, owned by himself, and Calvin and Hobbes on the other side, owned
Hmm.
by Bill Waters.
Hmm.
Bill, um, Peanuts was licensed out to everything in the world. There is nothing, there is no object in the whole world that hasn't been merchandised as Snoopy or Peanuts. And even though the comic is amazing, the merchandising has ended up hurting Peanuts.
Hmm.
On the other hand, Bill Watterson said no to all merchandising. There's very, very little official Calvin and Hobbes merchandise out there, and it makes it stronger.
Hmm.
Um, and Calvin and Hobbes is the better work because he administered his rights in a good way and he protected his comic in a good way. They, but then you go on to selling the exclusive rights to uh, large companies or to anyone else. Once Bill Watterson doesn't own Calvin and Hobbes, and he still does, so don't worry. But uh, in a world where he doesn't uh, own it himself, I'm having a very hard time figuring out how this works out to um, his benefit. Um, and I am seeing a lot of ways where it works out against his benefit. For instance, uh, more uh, uh, bands used to sell all the rights uh, to their music to companies, and just mixing up some white. Sorry. Uh, so bands used to sell all the rights and get a chunk of money, and then ended up not getting paid for the music, and that is uh, shitty. Nowadays, most bands keep the rights to their music themselves and don't really get paid for it because uh, the fact that you can sell your rights to a third party means they can use that as a lever, uh, uh, or that's not the word. They can use that to push the price down. They can say, we don't actually pay you very much for your music, but at least you get to keep your own rights.
Mm.
Uh, or you get the alternative, we pay you a bit more, but we keep the rights.
Right.
So that's a sort of it 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 flips the table to the benefit of the buyer of the rights against the seller. So it actually incentivizes buying art or buying rights, but it doesn't incentivize um, creating new art in the same way. So it's a bad incentive to create new art.
Mm,
Um, and I think that if you had, if all the exclusive rights were your own and you couldn't sell them, you could perhaps lend them, and people were allowed to use your work commercially as long as they paid you a fair amount. So, so everyone on Etsy, if you sell a Zelda figurine for $10, then you pay 10 cents to Nintendo. That would be at least as good a an incentive to create new art, and um, it wouldn't put pressure on artists to accept bad deals.
right.
And also, one very important thing is that the companies who buy up large shares of copyrighted content are really, really bad at taking care of it.
Mm,
And I'm not really talking about Disney taking care of Star Wars, because they don't seem like they're worse than George Lucas was. Um, but there are millions of music recordings, films, books, and other type of content that is just slowly dying in the cellars of huge corporations, because it's not worth enough to re-release it. And
right.
if someone wants to use it, then they say, okay, you can use this one song, but you pay us, what was it, $200,000 to use a song from the 1930s. And because they don't have any incentives to they don't have any incentives to give it away for free. They don't have any incentives to use it. So they basically just let it rot, as
Right.
the current laws incentivizes them to do. So we're actually in a position where it looks like more and more art is going to never get to the public domain. So it never becomes the property of the people, as copyright has always promised that it should. And art that isn't popular enough is getting lost and destroyed before it goes into the public domain.
Mm,
So we're in a situation where the laws that are there to protect artists uh, seem to end up killing art at a huge level.
gotcha. Um, so yeah, that's definitely very interesting. Fue again is asking, have you ever looked into copy left? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I'm currently I'm releasing all my own art under a uh, um, Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. It's not strictly a copyleft license, because I might be blundering this, but I think one of the copyleft things is that it has to remain um, uh, uh, um, a free work, but people can take this work, which I'm drawing, when I put this online in my gallery, I will release it under a Creative Commons license, and people can take it and use it as a album cover on their copyrighted album. So I don't really want to force people to use it in the same way as me, um, and that's a decision I've made because I want my work to be used by other artists, and I don't accept them. I don't expect them to be on board with my ideology from the first get-go. I hope that they will gradually get on board.
Right.
But yeah,
Um,
copyleft is good. Yes.
cool. So what would you say as far as like for creators and business wise, like do you think that releasing stuff under Creative Commons or copyleft is helpful business wise for an artist, or is it prohibitive? Does it seem to help? What do you think about that?
I think that Creative Commons is a very good. Uh, it's a good band-aid on an open wound.
Mm.
Uh, um, there, I would advise um, artists to to investigate for themselves.
Hmm.
But for instance, releasing your work under a Creative Commons non-commercial license is a good way of not losing any of your own rights, um, but telling your audience that you will not punish them for spreading your work.
Mm.
I think that's an important thing to say to your audience. Um, the other thing I've noticed is that you shouldn't really expect too much uh, from. You don't get much goodwill for doing Creative Commons things.
Huh.
Uh, if you say this work is free today, then you get 1,000 downloads. If you say this work is free forever, you get three, not 3,000, three individual downloads. So,
Gotcha.
um, so there there isn't a good business in doing Creative Commons that I've found yet, but doing it to just just to say to your readers or viewers or uh, your fans that you will not punish them. I think that can be important. Important. And then if you're a bit more zealous, zealous, uh, insane like me, then you can go all the way. And it hasn't hurt me thus far.
Right. Well, that's definitely interesting. Well, I wonder if a way around it is just don't say it's free forever, but even though it is, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Say here it's free today.
I've thought about it.
Now,
But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I've thought about doing just what you said, but I'm too honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, so being involved with these metal bands, I'm and having that policy, has anybody taken you up on that, and maybe made an album cover of some of your work, or?
Yeah, uh, I've had I've it has been more that they have commissioned me to do original work for them,
Hmm.
and then I've used the live sketches in the booklets and stuff. But a few smaller bands have used my free art for band covers, and I think the biggest thing that I wasn't involved with myself or directly involved with was the Irish metal band Primordial,
Hmm.
who used my art in their live CD, uh, and they actually tried to uh, pay me for it, but they ended up not getting the funding they wanted from their record company. So,
Uh,
but I had already uh, approved. I didn't need to approve it. They could have done it without asking, but but everyone, more or less everyone who's an artist of any worth, is sort of polite and careful about stuff, and they all want to be good guys.
right.
So everyone asks.
That's good. Everyone you know of.
Yeah, I have not yet seen any major misuse of my
Mm.
art from anyone, fans, bands, anyone. A few people have forgotten to tag me when they use my art as their Facebook profile image, but that's the severity of the misuse thus far.
So the you use Creative Commons, so that requires is supposed to require people to pretty much at least attribute the work to you, correct?
Yeah, I used the Creative Commons attribution license uh, in countries that are ruled by the Berne Convention on Copyright. Uh, that the that's actually the minimum uh, that you can use, um, because attribution uh, is part of what's called the moral rights. So
Hmm.
even though, okay, let's use a stupid example. Uh, Even though the author of the Bible is dead, you have to write the Bible by God. You can't write the Bible by Kim.
Gotcha.
Uh, Actually, you don't have to write the Bible by God, but you can't write the Bible. You can't misattribute the work. You
Hmm.
can't say the Iliad by nobody. It has to be the Iliad by Homer, and
Hmm.
that right is eternal. So the attribution right is under European law eternal. Um, I'm not quite sure how it is under American law, but it's probably not that far off either.
Right.
Um, but there are other Creative Commons licenses which protect more than just the attribution. And if we're speaking of the moral rights, uh, um, which I like to speak of because I think they're the best part of the current copyright law, then attribution should actually be quite a powerful tool because within um, the attribution is also the right to protect your good name and reputation,
Mm-hmm.
which means that uh, if these laws had been in use, and they are largely dormant, but if they had been in use, then it would have been a very um, broad protection. So theoretically, if someone uses, okay, uh, um, let's see, the Greek Nazi Party decides to use this poster as a metaphor for what's happening in uh, in the refugee crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really want my name associated with the Greek Nazi Party because I am not a Greek Nazi. Uh, so the right to protect my good name and reputation would actually allow me to say no. You can't, even though I gave this out for free under a attribution license, you can't use this because you're using it in a way that is damaging my name, and you can't use it without my name either.
Hmm.
But that's largely theoretical because the moral rights are originally and a very important part of European copyright law, but have seldom gotten through gotten had to prove themselves in courts, and
Right.
they're I wouldn't say forgotten, but they are almost forgotten, if we can say that.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool. Um, yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, I guess what I would like to do here is, first of all, thank you for coming on and hanging out with me.
Thank you for inviting me on. It was very fun. I got to talk a
Yeah,
lot. I like talking a lot.
that's good. Yeah, and I'll be honest. Like, if you ever want to come by again, I do these art casts kind of randomly, but in the mornings around this time or earlier.
Yeah,
A lot of times, and if you want, I'll be happy to share the link with you when I do these,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you can come in if you like, because I would love to chat with you more. Um,
yeah.
but
Maybe I'll ask you some questions back the
there
next
you
time.
go. That sounds good. Um, so what is what's the thing that you'd love to point people to know more about you and your work and social media stuff and whatever else you're working on?
Yeah. Right now it's Inktober, and on all my social media channels, I'm doing one original ink image per day. And if you follow me on Facebook, which is facebook.com/DUHH hands, I did not decide that link. But, then I at 9 o'clock Norwegian time every day I'm drawing the Inktober images live, and we're doing it the way that my wife is revealing to me what the word from the official Inktober prompt list is, and I have to directly try to interpret that in some way that makes sense. So
Nice.
go to my Facebook and come watch me draw in a few hours.
Oh, okay. So the one you did this morning, was that for
No,
Inktober? Or?
that was just random stuff. That was not for Inktober. That's a picture I've been working on for a long time and still probably have a few sessions left. So
Right.
based on the Norse god of death, Hel,
Gotcha.
also known from Thor Ragnarok.
Awesome. That we'll have to get in when we talk again. We'll have to get into some mythology because that's always an awesome, interesting
Yeah,
subject as well.
absolutely.
I'm just trying to add your links. I got a couple of links in already. I'm adding the
Yeah.
Facebook as we speak. It is now officially in the description. So if you guys want to check his stuff out, check out the links in the description. You guys know where you can find me, donkeyjawprojects.com. You can find all my links, and Marshall Lee underscore DJP on Instagram and Twitter. And that's about it. Again, thank you, Kim, for coming on, and it was awesome talking to you. And we will talk to you guys, and thank you guys for listening and watching as well.
Thank you
And
so
we
much.
will, yeah, absolutely, and we'll talk to you on the next Artcast, the next early bird Artcast. All right, I'll talk to
Okay.
you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.